Hey, and welcome to this introduction in Excel. Today, we're going to look at the programming language in Excel, which is called VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications. Now, with this, you can do all kinds of stuff with your Excel book. We're going to look mainly at adding our own functions in Excel, but you can do it you can program all kinds of things. So we're just going to look at that aspect and look a little bit under the hood and how it works in this introduction. Now, you find VBA under the Developer tab. This is the ribbon, and the Developer tab is where you find Visual Basic. If you don't have this here, that means it's not been selected to appear on your ribbon. So you have to go to File and Options. On the Mac, I believe it's Preferences, and go to Customize Ribbon and click in your Developer. Now, if it's not selected, like if it looks like this, then you need to click it in, press OK, and it will appear. Once you have it, we click on Visual Basic, and up pumps a window that looks like this. Now, this window is for all your Excel books that are opened. Here we have Book 1, as we can see here, and here we see VBA Project Book 1. Now, this is our book that we have opened. But if we open another book, File, New, then we see here this is a new book. We call Book 3. We see that this one is now appears here, right? So VBA Project Book 3. So when we need to keep that in mind, because when we do our code, we need to make sure that our code, that we are specific in our code and that's in the right place. It's often easy mistake to make in the beginning in that you sort of misreference or put the code in the wrong place. So, and that's the general attitude we want to have, is that although regular Excel sometimes is quite intuitive, for example, if I write 2012, 2013, select both of these and drag them down with this by clicking on this box, it understands that I probably want to increase the years. That kind of intuition we don't want to apply to the programming language. So we want to be very specific and precise here. So when we want to make code, we want to apply that to a book. And in order to do so, we go to our book that we want to work in, Book 1 in this case, and go to Insert and Module. This creates a place where we can write code that will apply to the entire book, and only to this Book 1. Again, this book doesn't, the module doesn't apply to it. We see that this module is Module 1, belongs to a folder Modules that belongs here to this VBA Project Book 1. So that's the first thing. We might create several modules. That's okay. We don't need more modules. We can remove it by right-clicking and remove module 2. Do you want to export it? No. So what we need to think about here is that we want to make sure we write the code in the right place. So here it says Book 1, Module 1. And it's an easy mistake to make in the beginning is, for example, we double-click here. Now it says Book 1, Sheet 1, and we start writing our code here. Now it won't apply to the whole book. We need to write it in our Module 1. That's one thing. Second thing, if we, for example, double-click on this one, we're now in Book 3, Sheet 1. This code is not going to apply at all to our open book. So we need to make sure that the code is in the right place, and we can check that by seeing it here. Another simple mistake to make is, for example, to remove these. You might click that away. Now it's gone. What do I do? Well, you go here on View, and it's the Project Explorer. That's how we get that back. Another thing is, if it's like this, it's hard to see, just move it down so we can have a nice view of where we are. And we see that we're in Module 1. Here's where we are. So it's good to have this kind of overview. Now, again, we want to be very specific because I like to characterize it as being grumpy. It's being very particular. So it's not going to try to interpret what we say in a sort of general sense of get the reasonable idea of what we're writing. It's going to be very particular with what we add in our code. So if we write something, it's going to read that and only that and no other variation of it to understand it. So if we want to add a function, we can do that in Excel. So we write let's see, let's spell correctly, function, and we might name it. So we name it, all right, my sum. That's what I'm going to call it. And then we press enter, and we see, in order to, because it's very particular, it also gives us some visual clues. So we get this in blue, and we get an end function in blue. It says here it starts a function, here it ends a function. So that's something we are doing now. These are internal sort of access or internal commands within Visual Basic. So when I write function, that is a command in Visual Basic that creates a function, and here's where it ends that function. I then write a name and a parenthesis for input. This function now exists. It doesn't do anything. Well, it has as a name, but it now exists. I've added it into my book 1, module 1, and I can now see it here. Not in book 3, so I remove that, but in book 1. In book 1, I should be able to find it now. So let's do we see we get my sum here. It is a function that's been added. So if I write a regular sum function and says just the sum, this one added to that one, those two numbers, or let's do this. A2 and A3, let's add those two together. 2 and 5, or 2 and 6, we get 8. Okay. And I can copy this here. I put an apostrophe. There we go. The sum function adds together these two numbers, and 2 plus 6 equals 8. Now let's see if I can make the same thing in my function. So in my function, I need inputs. So let's say my sum only adds together 2 numbers. It's not a great function. It adds together 2 numbers. So it takes 2 inputs, the first number and the second number, that I then add together. So we need to call them something. These are our variables. So we could call it x and y, for example, and we separate them with a comma. Or we can give them a name like number 1 and number 2. It's better often to keep it shorter, so x and y, or a and b, or something like that. That could be our inputs. But this is just the name of our input variables. And then, so I have my function and how many variables we put in this case 2. We separate the variables by comma, and we also have given them names. We then define the function. So here I write the function name, my sum, is equals to, and what is it? Well, it's the one variable plus the other one, a plus b. So because I named this one a and I named this one b, I can now write a plus b. If I gave them a different name, number 1 and number 2, then I have to write number 1 and number 2 here. And that's fine. But if I make some spelling error, so write something like this, then because this is not the same as that, I won't get the right answer. It won't be able to perform. And why is this? Because it won't make a reasonable interpretation. Say, oh, you probably meant to talk about this variable. No, I need to be exact here. So always be very exact. And that's why sometimes shorter names, variable names, are better than longer ones. So we write A and B like that. Might be easier to see and less likely to make a spelling error. We see here what happens if I call upon this. All right, my sum, and we can click on the FX button. We get up a little box as we're used to. We see the 2 names of the variables. We don't see much else. We don't see any description or anything because we hadn't added that. And then we can say for the first one we want A2, and for the second one we want A3. And we see here it adds them together, so we get 8. So let's copy that and put it in. So here I've copied the sum function for 2 input variables. And that's and we now see what we can use this for. So we see here that within Visual Basic, there are internal commands such as function, which creates a function. There is an internal syntax of what parenthesis means, and sort of when you add a function, that means that you want to create something with input variables and so on. And it can also do basic arithmetic with regards to plus and minus and so on. If we want to add a line of code that doesn't mean anything, it's just a comment, we add an apostrophe. So here is my comment. If we add an apostrophe, everything that's behind it, including the apostrophe and everything behind it, becomes green and is treated as a comment. So it will skip over it with regards to running the code. It will just pretend that it isn't there, and it's just for our benefit to make a comment, to write something for ourselves or for somebody else to say, okay, here's what this does, and something like that. You can place it on the same line. You can, for example, place it here. Here is what my function does, for example, as a comment to what this line of code means. And that can be useful, especially if you're writing something and then you pass it on to somebody else, so you want to save it for later to have some commentary. Now, because VBA is very grumpy, you can have a choice to make it either grumpy and silent or grumpy and will tell you that it's grumpy. So let's see, we A and B, and I make a mistake and write A and C here. What happens? Well, nothing happens here. You see, it's still 8, but that's because it hasn't made the calculation. Let's do this again. I'm just going to press enter here, and it redoes the calculation, and it becomes 2. Why is this? Because C I haven't defined. I haven't said what C is, so it just assumes, okay, well, I don't know what C is, so I'm just going to assume it's 0, and then we get A plus 0. That's 2 plus 0. That's 2. So VBA is being very particular and is not making any reasonable interpretations. It's saying, oh, well, it's 0, and then I move on. But it's not letting you know either. We don't know if it's correct. We don't get an error message. We don't get anything like that. It just says it's 2. And, here we notice this mistake. It's quite obvious. 2 plus 6 isn't 2. But if you have a longer function, there might be a mistake like that, and you want to know about it. In that case, you can tell Excel to let you know. And you can do so by writing option explicit. Now, Excel will be explicitly telling you whenever there's an issue like this. It won't just skip over the C. It will let you know that, hey, here's a C. I don't know what this is. I'm going to tell you about it. So if you write option explicit at the top of your code box, we then press somewhere else. We'll get a little line here. It becomes blue again. This is an internal command in Excel to make it be vocal about when something is strange. So now we'll see what happens. We run this again. We get an error notification, a compiling error variable not defined, and says, here's the problem when I try to run this function. So a little arrow pointed to it, and it says, here is and it selects to see, here's what I didn't find. I didn't know what this was. So we can then change this. So we go in here and change it to a B. And then we need to click here, reset. And now it works. So it pauses. We can click on reset, and then once we've done that, it will work again. So it will temporarily pause while you investigate the error. So what do we want to do? Well, let's look at a model. So let's create a new worksheet. We can rename it by double clicking and calling it model here. Let's say we have a pricing mechanism where we might have the price of a let's look at like a demand function, a price function in a market. So we might have the basic profit being just a price minus, or price minus, let's not be price minus cost. We can have the total profit obviously be the profit of 1 multiplied by the total sales or total demand. And we can define demand as based on the market size minus the price multiplied by a price sensitivity factor, sensitivity. So, for example, so here we have some definitions. So in this case, we might have an initial market size, how many people want to buy our product. Let's make that 100. We might have a certain price sensitivity. Let's make that 1 to start with. So it's a factor of 1. And then we can look at various kinds of prices and various kinds of profits we get based on various prices and various costs. So we can make a table, which we looked at earlier. I'm zooming out a little bit here. So if we put our price here and our there and our cost here, we can have various prices, 10, 20, 30, and so on. We can have various costs. We do 5, 10, 15, 20, so on. And then we can try to calculate what our profit will be. So this will be a table of profits. Now let's make this a little nicer like this. There we go. And so here's our various costs, here's our various prices. What profit would we make? Well, we'd have to figure out, first of all, what do we make profit for each sold? It would be price minus cost, right? And we'd want to lock these. So we'd lock this one to row 6, and we'd lock this one to column C, as we looked at when we talked about references. That would be the profit we made for each sale. Now the question is, how many do we sell? Well, that's multiplied by demand. As we see, multiplied by profit, multiplied by demand is our total profit. But what is our demand? Well, our demand would be the market size up here, which we will lock, minus the price, which again we'll lock to column C, multiplied by our sensitivity, which we lock again. And here we see that we get, here's what profit we make per sale, price minus cost. Here's how big the market is, which is the general market size minus the price multiplied by a sensitivity factor. So here are the profits we make. And we see here that, let's take it down to 100. And here are the various profits, total profits we make. We can go to conditional formatting and add a color scale, green for high numbers, red for low. And here we see how this will look like. Now, this works, but it's a little bit perhaps complicated to deal with it in this way. Now, one way to make it easier would be to name these two, market size and price sensitivity. We could do that. So I'll go insert, I'll go to is it formulas, and we go to, here we have our name manager, we go create from selection, and we go left column, click OK, and now we see this is called market size. They add a little line underneath in between market and size where the space was, and same here, this is called price sensitivity. And now instead of having these to be locked references, we can just give them as named references, and that's the same as a locked reference. Market size and price sensitivity. Might make it a little bit easier but it's still a bit of a mess. It's still a bit hard to know, okay, exactly what is this? So we can instead make a function or two that does this for us. So let's look at that. So we can start a function here, called function. And let's start with creating the demand function. And what is the demand function? Well, it requires three things. It requires a market size. It requires a price, and it requires a price sensitivity. Now, I call these market size, price, and sensitivity. You might want to call them something else. These are internal names. You could call them X, Y, Z. We can call whatever we want. Okay. Oh, yes, and we see here that in Visual Basic uses the comma as opposed to the Excel that uses the semicolon. So we see it lets us know when we make a mistake there. Okay. So now we have these three variables, and then we say, what is demand then? Well, demand is equal to market size minus price multiplied by sensitivity. Now, again, I have option explicit here, so if I make a mistake, if this is misspelt, if I missed something like that, then it will let me know. So it's very good, because that's a common mistake to make, especially in the beginning when you're not used to the level of preciseness needed. And now we've defined our demand function. So we can calculate our demand. We can call upon it. We write demand. And then we click the box icon. We see here we have market size, price, and sensitivity. Market size we have there. Price, we can take this one, for example, and sensitivity is that. We get that demand is 90. Okay. Now let's look at the other function. That is the total profit function. So function, we can just call it profit, or if we will, total profit. So we have the total profit function, and that takes, we need the price for that one, we need the cost, and we need the demand. Okay, and what does the function do? Well, the total profit, it is equal to price minus cost multiplied by demand. Double check that the spelling is correct, otherwise it will let me know. And here we are, I have the total profit. Now I can rewrite this. So if we remember what these numbers were, sort of 2,000 here, 1,000 there, minus there, 0 all the way here. We delete this. When we call upon this, we have our total profit function. Click on our button here, and we see we need price. We need, whoops, and now I clicked on the name price, but where is our price? It's right here, and we need to lock it to column C. We need our cost, which is right there, and we lock it to row 6. And we need our demand. Now, where do we find our demand? Well, we'll nest this function. So we'll add the demand function in here. So I'll put a placeholder for now. Just write something, A, click OK. Get value because it doesn't know what this means. No, here we write our demand function. So double click on that. Now we have our demand function ready. We click on the FX, we get our demand function up. We need market size, we need price, and we need we need our price sensitivity, which is that, and we need our price. So remember also to put the right thing in the right place, and that's why it's good to name your variables things they can easily see. So if this was only X, Y, Z, or A, B, C, we wouldn't know if it was the right one, which one goes where. But if I call it market size, and okay, I need market size there. Sensitivity, I need sensitivity there. And price, we have it here, and I lock it to the correct, so it's in column C. And they found a typo, but Excel, again, not Visual Basic, but Excel is intuitive, so they added, the typo was that we're missing this parenthesis, but they added it, so it was fine. And we pull it out by pressing this little green square, and here we go, and we get the same numbers. So now we have something that perhaps is a little bit easier to understand. We have a total profit based on the demand function. We can also build this function in here if we want. So I'm just going to call this the sort of the profit function, and we could just create it based on adding the other two together. So we'd need price, we'd need cost, we'd need demand, which is based on market size, and price again, and sensitivity. Those 4 inputs. So we could create a function that just puts these two together at once, and that would be, we just write it down. So profit equals price minus cost multiplied by market size minus price multiplied by sensitivity. There, and parentheses. So we just do it all in one function. That is also fine. Let's try that. Write profit. Try that function, and we see we need price, and we change it so it's locked in column C. We need cost, which we lock to row 6. We need market size, we need sensitivity, and that's it. And again, we see we get the same. So those are things to consider. Now lastly, the last thing to consider is that when we've done all this, when we've created these functions and all that, we want to save them so that they are contained within the file. And so when we open them, we still have them, right? We still have our code. So in order to do so, we have to save Excel in a specific format. So we go to File, Save As, Browse, and we can, let's save it to desktop. And we see here we can save it as a macro-enabled workbook. So we save it as a macro-enabled workbook, and we'll be able to keep our code. So we shouldn't save it as an Excel workbook, but a macro-enabled. And the difference is, if we save it here as a, here's where I have my code, it will save it as an XLSM. The M stands for macro, and that's how you know your code is saved. If it's instead XLSX, then the code isn't saved. So if we click here, workbook, then we won't save the code, and we will see it as an XLSX file. And that's without any code. So our code will be gone. So we need to make sure we save it as a macro-enabled workbook, and then we will have our code. Okay, so that's a short introduction to VBA and how to deal with the sort of basic programming language of Excel.